Since I've been a kid, I've been camping a lot, going fishing. I'm a keen wildlife photographer. In India, around forests, people are very poor. They have no form of employment. A lot of them poach tigers and elephants, not because they want to, but because they have to. I was camping in the Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary in South India when I heard 9 gunshots. For me, it was just that one turning moment. It was pure anger. When I heard those 9 shots across the river from me, it was 9 gunshots. And I could imagine some poor elephant getting shot twice and bleeding and dying 2 days later. And it's ridiculous, because when I've been on safaris, I've seen wounded elephants and I've seen them, and they're intelligent animals. And it was, I mean, that night I was just burning with anger, and the next morning I need to do something. I can't just sit back and let this happen around me. I mean, if that happens in 10, 15 years when I come here, it'll be empty, and I couldn't live with that. I approached the Wildlife Association of South India, which is an NGO that works in the region, and we got a group of us together. It was a passionate presentation, and at the end of it, I mean, we just saw everyone like nodding at the back, and we realized there was nothing happening. So after the week, I went up to one of the school children and I was like, I mean, why? He said, well, first of all, they need food today, and if they don't have food today, we don't care about 20 years. Secondly, we're kids, we're not going to stop the poachers, and they're really great people, because they were seen as, you know, the people who were providing for the region. They were getting the money in, etc. So, I mean, and at that point I was like blank. I really like economics. It's my thing. So I was looking at the incentives. I was like, why would someone in such a beautiful place, who knows it's so beautiful and grew up there like I did, why would they actually turn to destroying it? And the result, like most things, is economic incentives. So I thought, well, why don't I try and change those economic incentives? It was just, for me, the actual thing that made me move from just thinking about it and you know, being sad about it was just that anger of that one night. So we went to the village nearby, and there was a notorious poacher who's quite a character, and a really interesting guy called Karya. He's sort of famous in those parts because once, when he had the poaching anti-task force behind him, he jumped into the river, found a piece of grass which is like a snorkel, and hid under the water for 4 hours, breathing through that straw while the poaching task force was around. And the fact that that story was so well known is testament to the fact that, I mean, after the poaching task force leaves, that's it, that's the end of it. I mean, until they come next year. We met Karya and he was telling me the story and he was very happy about it, and it was pretty ridiculous. And we were like, you've grown up here, don't you love nature, don't you love the animals around you? He was like, of course I do, but I have to feed my family. So how can we change that? How can we give them alternative employment? What is their comparative advantage? Everyone, they should have some sort of comparative advantage. And these poachers who are not educated, most of the village, I mean, their education is very basic. It's just about English. So, I mean, their alternative forms of employment are not in the city. They can't join the global economy. But what they do know is they do know the forest inside out. The first thing we did, we sort of had to break down how much he actually makes. And it wasn't that much at all. Most of the money is made by the middlemen, the people selling it to the Chinese medicine makers or the ivory curio makers, etc. If we paid you about 4,500, which is an increase of about £20 a month, would you come work for a resort and try and show people the animals you would have otherwise killed? And he was like, I'll give it a try, but no one can be my boss. So we tied him up with one of these resorts, and they began employing him. He showed tourists a lot more animals. There were a record number of sightings. The resort became very popular, and he slowly got a couple of his friends into it. And what happened there was a lot of the indigenous people, they were like, they saw that these guys were making money from showing people animals, and if someone was going to go poach those animals, they knew that their income would go down. So these big poachers who knew everyone, who were like the bosses of the region, they were like, yeah, now we're going to protect this area. And there was a turnaround. So working from that comparative advantage, I tied it up. But I mean, the disappointing period was terrible. But you do, if you just mull over it and you think about it a little more, sort of clear your head and start with a blank sheet, you normally can find something. And I mean, every failure teaches you something new. I mean, the whole education program, which it could have carried on indefinitely with absolutely no point whatsoever, would have been a complete waste. So you learn from your failures, and it's a lot of times, I mean, that period was probably one of my most introspective periods in a long time, it was good for me. It was character building. It was nice. It adds to the whole growth of a human being, and there is always a way to sort of, if you're persistent enough, figure it out as well after every failure. 4 or 5 months after the project had been initiated, where I spent a whole weekend there and didn't hear a single gunshot, where we went out with in a jeep with a poacher guiding us, and we saw 2 tigers on one weekend, 2 separate tigers, which is very, very rare. People go their whole lives without seeing tigers in the wild. That weekend I was like, wow, I mean, I genuinely can take a little bit of credit for this. The happiness of, first of all, seeing the beautiful nature around you, and the happiness of knowing that you have in some way helped that. It was overwhelming. I mean, for that one weekend I was absolutely on the moon, I mean, over the moon. It was crazy.